Hi, everyone. I just wanted to quickly welcome you all to the 2021 Combine Annual Career Workshop. This is an event sponsored by Combine. So you're seeing right now, I'm sharing just the website for the program. So Combine stands for Computation and Mathematics for Biological Networks. It's an NSF-funded fellows program for graduate students. And so the event today, the annual career workshop, is actually put together by the fellows themselves. So I just wanted to, say thanks and congratulate Spandan Patak, who was leading the organization of today. We have a great lineup of speakers, and then we'll go into a panel for careers in data science, outside of the academic setting. And I think at this point, I'll just say that if you're interested in learning more about this fellows program, you can go to the website, which is combine.umd.edu, or you can email me. I'm going to put my email into the chat. If you just want to chat about the program or anything like that. But I'll just let Spandan take over at this point.
Daniel, do you want to start? Oh, that already started. Okay. Hey, good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining in. I'm Spandan Pathak, and on behalf of the Combine Student Committee, today I'd like to welcome everyone to Combine's 4th annual Career Symposium. Now, in this event, we'll have eminent speakers who have transitioned to different career pathways from academia, and they'll share their unique experiences that they have had throughout this journey, and also share insights into what they have learned from the hurdles on their way. Now, due to the ongoing pandemic, for the second ongoing year, we are having this symposium online. Meeting all the speakers in person definitely would have been much more exciting than the virtual setup we have now. And I'm sure all of us would have loved to interact with them face to face. However, being used to this new normal for more than a year, this won't stop us from being excited and hearing more from them. I think without much ado, I would just introduce our first speaker and hand it over to him. So our first speaker is Sam Goldberg. Sam is currently a data scientist from the New York Red Bulls, where he is integrating data-driven processes to assist the first-team decisions made at the club. Prior to working for New York Red Bulls, Sam was a development coach for Major League Baseball's Chicago clubs, where he used data to increase on-field performance with the organization. He also served as a data scientist for DC United, which is pretty close to our home here, working in player recruitment and game analysis. Sam has also published a wealth of research for American Soccer Analysis, which is the leading soccer analytics blog in the United States, which focused on topics ranging from player recruitment to effective team spending and game theory and whatnot. He graduated from Macalester College in 2019 and currently pursuing his graduate studies in applied data science from Syracuse University. So yeah, I hand it over to Sam and let's hear more from him.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. So let me share my screen here. I put together a little presentation. First off, I'd say it's really, really cool that we get to talk. I know this is more focused on biological networks, but that's how I got my start in soccer analytics, was actually through network analysis. And so to kind of dig in, I don't do much of it now, but to dig into the archives of that was pretty awesome. So I'm really excited. So I put together just super informal presentation for you guys, just a little bit about myself, my role, some network analysis stuff, just as an example, and then one little fun slide, and then just wanted to open it up for Q&As because I unfortunately can't speak at the panel today. So without further ado, so journey, role, network analysis, like we just talked about. So my journey is a little bit of a weird one, non-traditional one. So from Maryland, I grew up in Gaithersburg, went to high school in Rockville, Wooten High School, in the MCPS public school system. Then I went to Macalester College for undergrad, where I played baseball. And I was actually a political science major, had no interest in math. I even dropped out of high school stats to take another class. It just wasn't, math was never for me. Then I took intro to stats my junior year and something clicked. So after Macalester, where I did internships and tried to switch my major to math and kind of learned how to code, I went to play professional baseball for Roswell Invaders in the Pecos League, so independent professional baseball. And then when that was done, I joined DC United. I used a connection to get an internship there. And then from then on, it was pretty much down the wormhole of soccer analytics. You know, I've always been a huge soccer fan, so I wanted to essentially pursue a career in that rather than baseball. With that being said, I did take a little bit of a detour prior to the pandemic into baseball with the Chicago Cubs. And then finally, when I got laid off by the Cubs because of the pandemic, found a home at New York Red Bulls, where I've been now for about 9 months now, and will hopefully be here for a long, long time. So my journey kind of looks like that, but really it looks like that. So people think it's like this. In reality, it's probably like this, and then there'll probably be another downhill and then another uphill. It's just never as linear as people make it out to be. So as my role as a data scientist here, basically I build tools that stakeholders can use. That's the biggest thing that I do. With that being said, you know, we want to turn everything into process, really, right? So if I'm constantly having my hand in different pots, we can get a lot of a little bit done. But if I set up processes that people can use on a daily basis, then we're getting a lot done, and I have to do very little in the long run. So the latter kind of makes more sense than the former, obviously. I also, a lot of what I do, I work in player recruitment. So finding the best players for our team and measuring and identifying those players quickly. And then lastly is data education. So how can we educate people that don't have a data background to talk about data in a more positive way and utilize data and get, you know, things to people to realize that what they use already is data, right? Their mind is data. So, you know, the example I use is when I was at DC, one of the old coaches, you know, said to me, I don't see how you can use data here. Like, data is not really applicable in soccer, da, 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 da. How can you tell me this player's not good? Look how many goals he has. And my point was, well, goals are data. That's a data point. I'm just trying to get you to use some data that has some more context to it. And so that's where we kind of discuss, we can kind of educate stakeholders into data and get them on board. So I wanted to dig into the archives a little bit to talk about network analysis in soccer to try and see how we could apply it. You know, I could talk about building software on a daily basis or measuring players, but it doesn't really have the same, you know, excitement as if we're talking about network analysis. And this is a network analysis, you know, symposium, or as such, we should talk about network analysis here. So I wanted to kind of illustrate two questions here. Are there certain patterns that exist in a team network, and then who runs the team? And these are really two of infinite questions you could answer with network analysis. You know, how I actually got into soccer was an old friend of mine at college gave a presentation about, you know, what players should play together on the field most of the time in basketball. And that was showing, you know, the relationships of these players are stronger and the team is stronger when they're on the field, and matching that with points. So, yeah, it was super exciting to do. So without further ado, I wanted to present the first network analysis here. So obviously I have to keep out what the coloring scheme or size scheme or anything like that means and who the players are, just because I'm not really at liberty to discuss that stuff, as unfortunate as that may be. You know, but anyways, this is what would probably be the most common use of a network analysis in soccer. And that's what's called a pass network. So you take all of the passes from any given game for a team, and you plot that out on the field by their average position. And then from that, you can weight connections higher or lower, depending on what you're looking at. So this is something that we've actually done live during the game in previous roles, is sent that down to our coaches so they can interpret it on the field. And then we've also used it in some recruitment stuff to see how a player values their team. But this would be the most common one. So as you can see here, 4 and 7, we're actually playing with 4 at the back, but really in our system it's 2, because 4 and 7 are outside backs here, push up super high on the field. So this is going left to right, with 1 being our goalkeeper. We can see kind of that midfield box of 4, really, or a rhombus of 4 here. And then with 10 and 11, our 2 strikers up front. And so you can glean some interesting information from this. And for example, we talk about our outside backs pushing high. But in some cases, if they're both high, that leaves a lot of space here. So network analysis is great to overlay space creation with, and you can then see, okay, where are the empty spaces if we play with this network of passing. So we use this actually live during the game now without giving away too much, but the color scheme is different depending on what question we're trying to answer. So that would be the first one. The next example I would give to you guys is this one. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Gephi. This was built in Gephi, and I put this together the other night. So we wanted to measure who runs the team. So to me, that screams degree centrality, like in and out connections if a player. And if we can do this on a large scale over the course of the season, we're able to kind of figure out some stuff about our team and who's important and what kind of style needs to be in each position. So the most common formation we played with is 3 at the back. So defender 1, defender 2, defender 3. Here's our goalkeeper, our midfield box of 4 that we just talked about, our outside backs, and then our striker. So this is the most common formation that we play with. And so essentially what we can see here is like we can, over time determine, okay, well, this guy, we play out from the back a lot of goal kicks. So this guy is going to receive the ball a lot. And this is just honestly like simulated data that I wanted to just put up here. This is not indicative of any person or anybody on our team. But so if we see that a lot of connections are running through player 10 here, well, what are the implications of that? Right? That's the question that we need to answer. What are the implications of that? Well, we need somebody that's really, really good and clean on the ball. They're not going to give the ball away a lot because they have a ton of passes in and out. They have a lot of connections through the midfield, out to the other outside backs. So that's one implication that would arise from this network analysis. The second is our midfielder here has to be super clean because everything kind of runs out through him and up through him and back through him. So up, out, back, really the only 3 directions you can have on the field. Everything has to run through him and has to be super clean. And then with 4, this is probably one that most people wouldn't look at first, but is actually super important. Because we have an outside back, in this case, that plays up to the forward, inside to the 8, and up to number 4 here, let's say. What is that? What are the implications of that as well? We can see that he likes playing those passes a lot in that direction. So these players need to be very good at receiving passes, right? They have to be able to go and get those balls to receive them because we know that our outside back likes to play them. And so there's different team strategy stuff that we can do within a network analysis that allows us to kind of better illustrate our needs for a team. In this theoretical team, right, we could figure out, okay, well, we want to play out from the back a lot. So we know that these types of players, X, Y, need to be X, Y, and Z. The last thing I would say about network analysis is in soccer, and I've actually tweeted this before, is that in my opinion, my humble opinion, it is the single greatest thing to make beautiful artwork from. So this is data from our team for this entire year. Each node represents a player, and these are the connections of every single pass made across our entire season. And I look at this and I would hang this on my wall. So as a side note, I always like to share this slide because I absolutely love seeing the overlap between data and art. And I think that soccer is an absolutely awesome medium to do that. So that's what I've got for you guys today. And I wanted to answer any questions that may arise about how we use math in soccer, and just fire away because we're pretty much open book about what we can answer. So
Thanks a lot, Sam. That was really a good demonstration of how network-based analysis is used in professional soccer. And before opening up the floor to the audience, I would like to ask a quick couple of questions. The first one being, as you mentioned from your experience at DC United, say a lot of the times data-based, this kind of analysis approach has come up, and someone, say like you, is going up to the coach and saying, hey, we could also do this to analyze the data, blah, blah, blah. And at times there might be resistance from the coach's perspective saying, why should I trust you? Like, I have been in this business for so many years. So how do you sort of approach those kind of conflict scenarios?
Honestly, it goes back to 4 big words, and that's in everything that I go through within my job, no matter if I'm speaking to coaches, general manager, not just the people I work with, the scouts. 4 big words. How can I help? If you go into any conversation with those 4 words, then you can find definitely a good medium ground to do some work, even if they're skeptical of data. Even the most skeptical people in the world of data, they want help on projects that they're doing. And if they can get help and illustrate their point, it's going to be beneficial in the long run. So for me, it's that, and another quote that from one of my friends in the industry that I absolutely love is, you don't win people's hearts and minds with data, you win them with the salt and pepper shakers at the dining room table. So having those informal conversations with people about, hey, yeah, I get what you're saying. Have you thought about this? We can we can actually measure this. Those informal conversations are huge because there's always a feeling of skepticism towards it.
So you can't be absolutely rigid about what you're trying to say and not budge an inch from that. You can't do that.
Yeah, of course. And nor should you, right? Data is not
Right.
Not necessarily, as much as it pains me to say, it's not the end all be all. I want evidences wherever I can take it. If that's in video, if that's in data, and data has blind spots. Like, how can we measure this super specific question that is also kind of a feeling, but we also see evidence for it, right? Like those
Right.
middle ground questions, they're very hard to answer with data, if not impossible in the current day and age. So trusting the people that you work with and also providing evidence where you can is kind of that happy middle ground. And then really, it's not always about the most advanced analytics. It's about who trusts it and wants to use it the most.
My second follow-up question to that would be, how much your training has helped you transition to this field of soccer analytics, and how much you have learned on the job itself, because it's still a pretty emerging field and it's going to grow further and further, more towards since we approach 2026 World Cup here. So it's going to grow bigger and bigger. So how do you see your training has helped you?
Yeah, so I would say my formal education, obviously I got into math a little bit late, but when people ask me what my favorite class was, grad school or undergrad, statistics 101. I mean, easily my favorite class and I've ever taken, just because that's when the light bulb went off for me. So that's when I realized I was actually decent at math. It's not as confusing as I once thought. And then machine learning is my follow-up. So I would say it helped a lot, but most of what I've had to do is just, okay, I know exactly how I want to answer this question. I know exactly how I want to display it. I need to make it reproducible and error-free. How do I do that? Shoot, I don't know. I need to learn very quick and then figure it out. So a lot of it is on the job. A lot of it is self-taught, and just having that, really that will to just kind of learn pretty much anything you can on Google and Stack Overflow.
Yep, Stack Overflow is a lifesaver, isn't it?
My on a side note to that, my friend works for the Oakland A's in Major League Baseball, and they were at the winter meetings. I forget where they were, and Stack Overflow went down. And my buddy texted me, everyone's just sitting here joking, just saying, oh, I guess we're not doing any work today. So even at like the highest level of analytics teams, people still need Stack Overflow for pretty much everything.
Oakland A's were the ones who started this in the baseball arena,
Yep.
right? They were the leading ones.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else want to ask any questions or any comments on this? Please feel free to go ahead.
I have a question. So it's funny that you mentioned the Oakland A's and lapping with Moneyball. So in terms of recruiting, what type of metrics or what do you use to find players to bring into to Red Bull?
Yeah, so I can't answer that specifically, but generally speaking, we have a team philosophy, a club philosophy. So we're sponsored by Red Bull. I think we're one of the only clubs in the world that our style of play is directly tied to our brand, right? Red Bull is high energy. We're high energy style of play. We're always pressing, always going high against the bulwark. So we can kind of mimic what we see with our eyes into data, and then use those key performance indicators to then build out algorithms to say, okay, we need to know one of two things, or we actually always need to know two things. One, does this player contribute positive goal difference to our team? Do they contribute more than they hurt us? And then two, do they fit our style of play? So there are players in the world that answer question one that are phenomenal players that could not play for us. They're just not aggressive enough or, forward enough. And that's okay. And not every player is going to fit every team style. So we normally use those two combinations of things to figure out if this player would be good for us.
And also, I don't know if you can answer this, but what technologies do you use to allow your work to be as effective as possible?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to answer that. It's not a secret. So I code in R pretty much the whole day. I'm an R Studio lover. The founder, creator of R Studio went to McAllister, where I went for undergrad. So they just teach everybody R Studio. All of our internal software that I've built is in R Studio, Shiny Connect. And yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. So I write some SQL code to our backend, but really it's mostly our code and building out models and cleaning data and calling APIs. It's not exciting work, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
I have a question. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please. Sorry.
Yep. So I wanted to hear from a pro. So there is so much happening in a game, right? Someone gets the ball, that's easy to understand, but someone made a run, but did not get the pass. That's also very useful. But there is no objective way to understand whether that was useful or not. How do you guys take into account those stuffs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we use, there's two types of data that really exist in soccer. Or really three now, but there's tracking data, which is every player's location on the field 25 times a second for the entire game. So you're looking at 6-7 million observations of data per game for each team. So you're now, over the course of the season, billions and billions of observations of data. I'm the only person in New York. Liverpool, who just won the Champions League, have a team of 6. Neither one of us use tracking data in recruitment. It's too expensive. It's impossible to work with in a recruitment scale. And really overall, it's just there's no provider that really has tracking data for every team in the world. So with that, you have event data. Every time someone receives a pass, takes a shot, makes a tackle, etc., that's an event, an on-ball event. That middle ground is when you align the two and you can find contextual events of things like that. But progressive runs you can measure, that's a very clear definition. When a player runs behind the back line and then space creation on the field, so that's a physics model called pitch control, turns from space before, you take the difference of space before, space prior, and that positive difference would be how much space they've created for their team. So there's ways to answer those questions that are very, very difficult to do on a large scale. For example, if I run our pitch control model, it takes about, I call it 45 seconds for a single, 30 seconds, maybe 20 seconds on a good day for a single frame of imaging. So now if we were to sample even 1 second of imaging, which is still too low for the whole game, 90 times 60, whatever that is, 5,400 seconds frames times 45 seconds or 30 seconds a piece, you're looking at a lot of time over the course of a season for information that's only going to help about, call it 5 to 10%. So we try and knock away all of the low-hanging fruit as fast as we can. And then once we really have a good foundation set up, which probably will happen by end of next year, I would say, with our software being fully built out, we're about 75% operational now. That's when we can start answering those really cool and fun questions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Sam, the amount of sorry for barging in, the amount of data that you were talking about, are these commercially available for at least the big games, for say Champions League, World Cup? Say companies like Opta, do they provide them? Or
Yep. So Opta and StatsBomb are event data companies. You have companies like Skill Corner, Second Spectrum. They provide tracking and event data. Metrica is another one, provides tracking data as well. And so you can, so we we work with a data provider. We buy data from a data provider, which is standard practice. Every team does it. There's no team that has a single, like, that can collect their own data really on a large scale. It's just, you look at really 60, 70 leagues across the world that are relevant to most teams. So it's pretty difficult to do. So we work with providers to do that. There's loads of free data from StatsBomb, for example. You can get their free data online through their API and through their website. So there's a mix of free data, et cetera. American Soccer Analysis has excellent data and values on their website as well. So
I see. And I'm guessing this would go bigger and bigger as with the times to come, right? Because we're just slowly discovering the utility and different ways one could use it. Anyone else wants to go ahead and ask a question? Oh, Teresa, yeah.
Hey, Sam, thanks for the talk. That was awesome. So I have more of a career question, and that is, I'm assuming, I'll talk for myself. Most of us don't have, or I don't have any kind of sports background. So I'm wondering, in sports analytics, how open are they to hiring data scientists coming with minimal sports background, or is this a field that anyone here would be, able to get into?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would say, I'll answer that kind of in a few different parts if you don't mind. So it really depends on the organization. So for Red Bulls, like, I'm a soccer fan. I can talk about the game, not like excellently, but fine enough, really. So they understood in a first role, they need somebody that can do both. So this was a case where, like, if you're just a normal developer, let's say, they probably wouldn't necessarily go for that, which I understand. I've worked in a sports organization, the Cubs, for example, that have hired people directly out of, CERN or NASA that have no sports background whatsoever and simply are interested in working for the team. So there is definitely a path for both ways. Normally in initial hires, they look for people that can more speak the language, which I think is a nonsense phrase anyway, but speak the language of, that they can, which is understandable. So yeah, I would say there's definitely both. I would say if you're interested in going into sports, try and learn as much as you can about the sport, just because that's where you're going to go work. That would be the same with any job. But yeah, you can do both. I would say, though, if you're looking for a super large data science paycheck, sports is not the realm for that quite yet, unfortunately. So
I have one follow-up question if we have time.
Yeah, for sure.
So how much of your day-to-day work is team oriented? Do you have a data science team, or is it mostly, independent work?
If you asked me that question 2 weeks ago, the answer would be a lot different than it is now. So myself, I am my own team in New York, only one person, but as a group, so Red Bull actually has 4 different clubs. So we have Red Bull New York, which is in MLS. We have Red Bull Leipzig, which is in Germany. They play in the Bundesliga and the Champions League. RB Salzburg, which is in Austria. We actually don't do any work with them. We're not allowed to because of non-compete agreements. And then Red Bull Bragantino in Brazil. So those are the 4 big clubs that Red Bull has under its umbrella. So actually 3 months ago, it was me, and then they have a director of global analytics. And we don't really do much work together because he's more of like a long-term strategy, where I'm more technical, as well as some strategy for New York. Now, actually, we've hired 2 data scientists in Brazil and a data scientist who's actually a writer for The Athletic in Leipzig, Tom Wervel. And now I kind of manage that team in terms of recruitment. So we do a lot of projects together. We're starting to do some stuff together. We're rolling out software, across the globe, essentially trying to make those decisions. But a lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings of just writing software code and getting stuff to work with, pretty much brute force. So
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Do you have any advice or takeaways for an individual athlete on the field and how they could use some of these concepts for, a leadership perspective or learning the game and getting better and improving their teammates?
Yeah, of course. I think you're kind of asking about player development, and yeah, you can use data to measure pretty much anything. right? So if it's someone's, shot selection or pass selection or whatever general thing you might ask, yeah, you can definitely have coaches speak with them in terms of data, and they can learn more about the game for sure. I used it as a player in baseball. I used Rapsodo data on my swings to measure my ball flight and spin and exit velocity. So I knew if I was improving or not. So it happens every single day in a lot of different sports.
Any particular advice for a soccer player?
What position do you play?
Not me, but younger brother is a center back. He's down at Clemson and he started.
Is he plays at Clemson?
Yep.
Wow, that's awesome. What's his name?
Adam Lundegaard.
Adam Lundegaard. All right, I will definitely look him up. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, it really depends on team style, but just being able to be super athletic is probably the big thing, and putting out fires in different areas would be the big ones. So you can look at tackle percentages, 1v1 defending percentages, where you're getting beat on the field, and is that you can glean if that's from a certain reason or not.
Awesome. That was a great talk. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Do we have anyone else with any questions or queries? This is the time to go ahead, because Sam has a playoff game to play later today. So yeah, he won't be there for the panel. So yeah, this is the right opportunity to ask any doubts or questions that you might have.
I have one more. So, would you find it harder to statistically quantify a player who's like a hybrid, like a defender who plays a lot of the wing, or would you quantify them both as like a attacker and a defender?
You asked a question that hit very close to home, because we and pretty much every team in the world are trying to quantify that. So I'd go back to you with an example, right? So you play a 3-4-3, right? So 3 defenders at the back, 4 midfielders. Those 2 wide midfielders, are they wide midfielders or are they outside backs? Well, it depends on who you ask. So we could see them as attacking wing backs. Other teams would say, well, no, we're just playing 4 across the midfield, and we don't want them to go forward. So there's questions like that really there's no good answer to. And we just have to make a blanket, this essentially statement to say, okay, when the team's playing a 3-4-3, the 4 wide ones are wing backs, and we'll classify them as wing backs. So we just, as long as we create a rule system and we're consistent, then it's fine. Otherwise, we could be a little bit, screwed in the long run, so to speak, if we're classifying things in different ways. But no, fantastic question, and something that really everybody is working on, because it's just so difficult to measure.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I have an idea for our team. Basically, what we could do is we could put me at the number 10, because I'm like, the best on the team. I got the most skill. I just get the ball at feet, and I'll just free roam and make things happen pretty much.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yep, those who play soccer, we know exactly what you're talking about. All right. If there aren't any more questions, I would go for the last one before we finish the session. As far as your transition from, say, conventional academic career paths to soccer analytics is concerned, what do you think is the biggest roadblock or challenge that you have faced? And do you think for those who, as Theresa were asking, for those who don't have any prior experience to that, are these challenges mostly in our head, or these are actually significant roadblocks that one needs to conquer before making the transition?
I would say the challenges, and something I found, are pretty much like all in our heads. It's pretty scary to like go from academia to now like actually having to make a decision on somebody based on the facts in front of you. But as long as you're good at what you do and you're confident with a decision, you most importantly provide evidence for your decision, and no one's going to disrespect you or have no respect for you. I would say the biggest challenge from academia to And granted, I haven't spent a ton of time in academia. I'm not an academic at heart, really. I mean, I'm getting my advanced degree, et cetera. And I absolutely love academic research. I think if I could just sit down and do research for 24 hours a day, that would be my dream. But the biggest challenge is applicability. So like, if I want to answer a very specific question with research, that would take a ton of time. And then how could I apply that at scale without errors and it's reproducible? So what I'm alluding to is, while data scientists start, they quickly find in sports that their job is essentially, and it depends on the team, of course, but it quickly just turns into a full stack app developer if you're one person, because you don't have time to constantly be answering questions. You need to give power to essentially the stakeholders that you're with and utilizing data. If I just hand people stuff, I'm another guy with an opinion. If I give them the power to use data to say, I want to answer my own questions, then it becomes their opinion, it becomes their evidence, and then data can be used in the long run a little bit more. So previous roles, I've done game analysis week in, week out. How are we going to measure the opposition? What are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? I haven't done a single minute of that this year. I built a tool for our performance analysts to use, and now they incorporate it exactly how I would into our, match reviews, pregame, postgame, etc. So they do that with the software that we've built, and on top of that, it's custom built for us, so it has our metric set. So that applicability is always going to be the applicability, and use cases are the big two.
I guess you can't just throw your opinion regarding that without supporting it up.
Yeah, it's crazy because sports is the only, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it might be the only industry in the entire world that teams or people will make $1 million investments without evidence, without data backing it up. So I compare it to Wall Street. If I was working on Wall Street and I said to my boss, I want to invest $5 million in this stock. Okay, why? Well, I have a good feeling about it. No, you get fired in a minute, right? Like,
Right.
You're out.
Yeah.
There's no chance. So similarly to that, we have to have evidence for each thing that we're saying.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sam, for being with us here today. And it was a great talk with a lot of interesting questions. And I really wish you all the best for the playoffs today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And it was great talking. And I'll finish up by saying, if you ever need anything, do not hesitate to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. Just search Sam Goldberg. I'm sure I'll come up. And if not, Sam Goldberg, New York Red Bulls or something like that. On Twitter, you can follow me, Sam Goldberg 1882. Shoot me a message, literally wherever. I'm happy to help across anything, job search, advice, whatever you may need. Just please let me know. Happy to help.
Thanks a lot, Sam. I'll just give a round of applause virtually again for the talk, and hope to catch you sometime later.
Yeah. Thank you guys, and have a good rest of the conference.
Thanks.
All that are used for this kind of fields. And our next session would be in a quite different directions from software analytics. It would be regarding science policy and how different scientific discoveries and these principles are implemented in real life when policies are made, and what kind of roles academicians might have if they want to transition to that. So we have our second speaker with us now, is Emily Larkin. Emily has been as part of the NOAA for more than past 13 years. And she has been in different roles in this administration, from a program evaluator to different grant approving roles. And she is going to take us through a journey of how she had made this transition in her life and what one can hope to learn from once we hear from her more. So yeah, I would open up the floor for Emily regarding that. And I would add one more thing to that, which is Emily stays in College Park. So if you just bump into her one fine morning in the Lake Artemisia watching birds, so please don't be surprised, and you can just, catch up on that. So yeah, Emily, I think I need to give you sharing access. So just one. Oh, you are already the co-host. Yeah, Emily.
Thank you very much. And I am going to talk about a completely different career path. I caught just the last few minutes of the last speakers answering questions. First, can you hear me okay? Great, thank you. But there's actually some similarities between what that gentleman was doing and the career path that I've taken. And that's basically giving people the tools they need to make decisions using scientific information. So even though, you know, he's in the world of sports and I'm in the world of science policy, there are some commonalities there. So I have a few slides, and they won't take a full 30 minutes, and then we can go through, you know, I can answer questions. And bear with me just a second as I share my screen. My agency uses Google Meet, not Zoom, so I actually don't use Zoom a lot. All right, can you see my slides?
Yeah, yeah.
Great, okay. So as mentioned, I'm Emily Larkin. I am the acting deputy CFO, Chief Financial Officer for the research arm of NOAA, which is called Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And I have been doing this job since May. In my permanent role, I'm the director of formulation and congressional affairs. And I'll get a bit more into what that role is. And you might be thinking to yourself, what does a chief financial officer have to do with science? And we'll get to that. But to start off, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in rural Missouri in a small town named Warrensburg, which the whole town is smaller than University of Maryland, let alone College Park. I went to my local university, which was University of Central Missouri. I will be honest and say that the main virtues of it were it was I had enough scholarships to cover all of the tuition, which I'm sure everybody can understand, you know, the value of financial aid. And I majored in earth science and anthropology. And my goal at that time was to end up in academia. I took a few years off. I went into the Peace Corps. I was stationed in Samoa in the South Pacific. And if anyone doesn't know where that is, if you draw a line from Hawaii to New Zealand, it's about 2/3 of the way to New Zealand. And I taught physics and math at a rural secondary school there. To this day, I can still speak Samoan if I had to, even though it was 20 years ago. And so one of the great things about that was it gave me some time to kind of think about where I wanted to go. I ended up at Oregon State University after the Peace Corps, and I got a master's of science in geography. I worked with Don Wright, who was one of the first people to apply the principles of geographic information science to the marine setting. And I worked on benthic mapping in American Samoa, particularly with the Whangatele Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and then making that data available to the public there. But one of the things that happened as I was working on my master's was I realized academia probably wasn't the path I wanted to pursue. So then you're kind of left going, well, what do I do now? I mean, we all know that there are not enough academic positions for the number of PhDs granted. And I just wasn't sure that I wanted to kind of head down the path of the publish or perish world. And it's great for a lot of people. And I'm glad those folks are successful because they actually are doing a lot of the amazing work that, you know, I'm going to talk about today. But it wasn't for me. And while I was there, I saw an announcement for what was called the Knaus Fellowship, which was something that was focused on marine policy. And the Knaus Fellowship is aimed at graduate students with an interest in ocean, coastal, and Great Lakes resources. It's policy focused. It brings you to Washington, D.C. for a year. And there are executive and legislative branch placements. There's, I don't know, about 50 or 60 executive offices that take on fellows, and there's 10 to 15 legislative offices in Congress that take on fellows. The job market in 2005 in Oregon was pretty tough, and my husband and I looked at it and we were like, why don't we come to Washington, D.C. for a year? You'll note that that was 2005. It's been a really long year. The other benefit of the fellowship is it is paid. So this fellowship is administered by Sea Grant, and that I came through Sea Grant, Oregon. Maryland Sea Grant also places fellows with the this particular fellowship, and I'm going to put links at the end of my presentation so that if anyone is interested in this, they know where to start looking. And so I wound up working for the National Ocean Service, which is another part of NOAA, for my fellowship. And I'll talk a bit more about that. I want to step back and talk about what NOAA does. NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We do amazing things. I love my job. I love the agency that I work for. So we do weather forecasting, we do hurricane forecasting, we do coastal mapping, we run satellites, we protect marine mammals, we do fisheries regulation, we run national marine sanctuaries, which are kind of the ocean version of national parks. We have an amazing mission, and I love being part of it. My part of NOAA is Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. We basically deliver NOAA's future. We do all the work and the research and the development that allows NOAA to deliver better products and services to the American people. So one of the big things one of our big achievements most recently is we have developed a wildfire smoke forecast. You may have noticed over the summer, there were a few days where the sky here was sort of reddish in the mornings and in the evenings. And that was from wildfire smoke from out west. This is the map in the middle of this is an image from 2020, but this happens when we get big wildfires out west. We do drought monitoring. We do world-class climate research and climate modeling. We literally have Nobel Prize winning climate scientists at NOAA in OAR, which is where I work. We do ocean mapping. We do ocean technology development and observation technology development. The picture on the upper right is a sail drone. This thing is about 20 feet tall, and we sailed one into a hurricane for the first time. So it goes in at ocean level. You can't send people in there. It's not safe to do so, but we were able to send this instrument into a hurricane and gather data to try to better understand the dynamics that lead to intensification of hurricanes. So it's a really exciting place to work. And one of the great things about my job is I get to work with the scientists who are doing these things. So my path at NOAA, like I said, I spent a year as a Knauss Fellow in the National Ocean Service in 2005. I staffed a joint subcommittee that's a White House level committee called the Joint Subcommittee on Ocean Science and Technology. And basically what that was helping the chair of the committee, understand issues, coordinating the meetings and all of that. It wasn't always the most exciting work, but I met a lot of people that would become important to my career later on. And I got a broad understanding of the issues facing ocean science and technology across the federal government. I got to sit in on the discussions that were happening at the executive level. One of the really important achievements that happened at that time, this has been a number of years ago now, was we developed the first statement of ocean research priorities for the entire federal government. And that was a pretty big deal. That hadn't been done before. So after a few years, I went on to the NOAA Budget Office. And this is where people are like, what's someone with an interest in science doing in budget? And the answer is, where you spend your money is your priorities. So if you say that your priority is to buy a house and you're out buying, $100 meals and $15 martinis every night, your priority is probably actually eating out and drinking good liquor, not saving up money to buy a house. Where we spend our money in the federal government is a reflection of the priorities. So being in the budget office allowed me to play a part in setting the scientific direction of the agency. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. It was a great learning experience. I got to work with Congress, with appropriations staff. They're the folks that actually give money to the executive branch to spend on various projects. The big task in this office is putting together the president's budget every year. And so that involves working within the agency, working with the White House. And then every February, you'll hear in the news that the president sends his budget over to Congress and what Congress's reaction to that budget is. So It's actually a pretty interesting place to work, and you get to learn a lot about a wide variety of science, at least at NOAA. I spent a short assignment in 2012 at the Office of Management and Budget. That's the White House budget office. And I was the budget examiner for the United States Geological Survey. So I got to still be very close to the science and setting priorities for science, but with a completely different focus, with a focus on earthquake research and land-based ecosystems, just a very different focus than NOAA has. And then at the end of 2012, I went to NOAA's high performance computing program. So this was basically getting the infrastructure that NOAA's researchers need to run their models, making sure that they have enough high performance computing hours to run the models, making sure that we could justify to Congress that we needed more high performance computing, and we always need more. And making sure the contracts were appropriately administered. In 2017, I got the opportunity to become the director of OAR's Formulation and Congressional Analysis Division. So this is my permanent job. I oversee a team of about 25 people that does budget formulation. So that's justifying what we need money for. And then congressional analysis is all of the congressional affairs, going up and explaining to Congress what we do, what the value is of what we do, what things cost, and arranging for congressional visits. We also do strategic planning. Where do we want to be in this particular area of research in 5 years, in 10 years? What are the resources that we need to get there? How do we provide the National Weather Service with the technology that they need so they can move into the next generation of weather forecasting? How do we provide the world with the best climate models so that we understand what's going to happen over the next 100 years to the global climate regime? So this is a really exciting place to be. The other thing we do there is lab reviews. So we go out and we look at the quality, relevance, and performance of all of OAR's labs. And then this year, due to some shuffling in our office, I have been the acting deputy CFO since May. And I oversee not only the Formulation and Congressional Analysis Division, but a whole bunch of other divisions that are more on the administrative side of NOAA. So what is science policy? At the heart of it, it's communication. Being able to communicate about complex topics in a way that someone who does not have a science background is a really, really valuable skill. Being able to be that interface between someone who works on climate models day to day and someone who is a congressional staffer who maybe has a background in law or a background in public policy, who's very smart but doesn't have a foundation in science, and making the work that we do accessible to them is an incredible skill. If you have that skill, this is a great field, and you're not interested in academia, this is a great field to pursue. Budget, like I said, where you spend your money is your policy. Where we decide, we have a limited amount of resources. Should we spend it on further advancing climate modeling? Should we spend it on the next generation radar system for better tornado forecasting? Should we spend it on hurricane modeling? These are really hard questions, and there's good arguments for all of them. Being able to help executives navigate through that and explaining what the value is of one thing versus another, that is at its heart science policy. Congressional affairs, explaining to members of Congress why a new radar system is critical to their constituents in Oklahoma or in rural Missouri, and why they should invest a large amount of money in that versus putting more money towards Department of Justice, because those are the trade-offs that are going on in the federal government. Setting scientific direction, like I said, looking down the road 5-10 years, where should we be going as an agency? What do we need to get there? Prioritization of scientific initiatives. Do I invest in that radar system? Do I invest in more ocean mapping? What's more valuable to the American people? Sometimes those answers are not clear cut. Enabling research and development, investing in that infrastructure, such as high performance computing, such as observing systems, such as making sure that the buildings are taken care of. That's all really, really important to making sure that our scientists have what they need to do the work that they do. And then at the heart of it for NOAA is supporting critical improvements in products and services for the American people. The thing that I think most of the American people see from NOAA is those improved weather forecasts. When I was a kid growing up in rural Missouri, tornado warning lead time, so that's the amount of time from a tornado warning until a tornado hits, was about 10 minutes. And now we average about 25 minutes. That's a huge improvement for something that can be disastrous. That gives people that much more time to get to shelter, to grab their pets, to make sure that they can safely survive something like a tornado. So some examples of federal science policy work. We work with scientific staff to justify funding for new initiatives, translating that very complex scientific language into something that is more at the National Geographic level that White House staff or congressional staff will understand. Like I said, explaining the value of a research effort to congressional staff. We might produce a report describing scientific priorities in an area. We might work to justify additional research infrastructure. One of the things facing my organization right now is we have a couple of labs with some outdated lab equipment. So we need to figure out how to get them modern, up-to-date lab equipment. Answering questions from the White House in plain language about agency priorities. The back end is explaining how money was spent on a research project and what was achieved. Did we do what we said we were going to do? And were we able to deliver what we said we were going to deliver? And then, maybe developing planning for what will be achieved in the next 5 years. And these are just examples, some specific examples of things that I have worked on. Many people have heard of Doppler radar, and that's used for weather forecasting. Well, those radars are now 40 years old. They've gone through and they're mechanical, so they have moving parts. So they've gone through what's called a service life extension project, where they went in, they refreshed the mechanical parts, make sure everything's still working. So one of the questions before the agency now is, do we do another service life extension project in the 2030s, or do we invest in a completely different kind of radar, something called phased array radar? Over the course of my career, I have worked to get funding to do the research on phased array radar to see if it's a viable alternative to our current radars. That question's not answered yet, and it won't be answered until probably the end of this decade. But the Weather Service absolutely depends on those radars and needs to know the answer to that question. So I've been a part of that all along. And it's pretty exciting work. Another example is going and justifying to Congress that with additional high performance computing resources, we can make these scientific achievements. We can reduce the uncertainty in 21st century global temperature predictions and projections. And that's been very successful over the years. We've gotten a lot of money to improve our high performance computing infrastructure. So those are just some examples of the things that I've been involved in. I mentioned developing an ocean research priorities plan for the entire federal government about 10 years ago. So it's pretty exciting stuff. I mean, fundamentally, getting a new radar system will fundamentally change how the Weather Service does their severe weather forecasting. That's really exciting to be a part of. Like I said, I love my job. So some critical skills: communication, being able to explain difficult scientific concepts in a way that people understand. I can't emphasize this enough. Even if you end up in academia, no matter which field you end up in, if it's science related, if you have the ability to explain challenging concepts in a way that people understand, that's going to take you really far. Relationship building. I joke that I know everyone in NOAA, and that's not entirely true, but it has been a huge part of my success is getting to know people, knowing who to call when I have a problem I need to solve, working together. I heard that you're working on this issue. I'm working on a related issue. Can we work together? to get resources for both of the things that we're working on because they're related. That's critical. And then understanding the budget, no matter where you end up, whether it's academia, whether it's at a not-for-profit, whether it's, you know, doing data analytics for a sports team, understanding how the money flows will make you more successful. It is just a critical, it will help you in any organization and will put you ahead of other folks who don't take the time to learn that stuff. So that is my last slide. I've got a couple of links. I will send these slides so that, you know, they can be shared. I mentioned the Knaus Fellowship Program. That is a great program if you have any interest in ocean and coastal issues. Maryland Sea Grant would be, you know, for folks at University of Maryland, Maryland Sea Grant would be the avenue into that. And then just a link to NOAA Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. There's some pretty cool videos on there, particularly from our ocean exploration program. They post some pretty cool undersea videos of new species they find and things like that. So with that, I will open it up for questions. And I will stop sharing my screen. All right.
Thanks a lot, Emily, for taking all of us with you on that journey towards scientific policy and decision making. I would start off with a question first before anyone else wanna chime in. Not exactly related to say NOAA's research, but if I have to generally think about scientific policy, say something related to the climate change. There are skeptics regarding that. And also we have seen over the last more than a year, skeptics regarding vaccine and awarenesses regarding that. How much do you think the scientific policymakers or the think tank related to that can contribute better to that so that this kind of messages reach to a much wider and broader audience? Do you think that any changes could be made in that decision-making or policy-making levels, or it's at much more grassroots level where changes could be made?
I think it's a combination of both. And, you know, this is a really hard problem, right? We've really politicized science. So I think it's a really tough problem to tackle. And I see this even within my own extended family. I have extended family that are, you know, the vaccines have microchips in them and they're going to, you know, track me. And I think, you know, on an individual level, approaching it with compassion and explaining it with, in a way that it doesn't sound like you're talking down to people, right? But there's also a role in the national conversation for, and I think the Biden administration is trying to do that. This is speaking as my personal opinion, not as an official NOAA position, but they're trying really hard and trying to explain why they're doing things. I think in climate over the years, I think climate scientists have sometimes kind of failed on this because they're like, my data is good, I don't have to explain it. And at the end of the day, if you're working for the taxpayer, you do have to explain it, right? Like we need to tell people what they're buying. And I think it's just really challenging, and it's a multi-pronged approach, you know, on an individual level, and also at the sort of federal government and state government levels. You know, we have to kind of push things forward. The weather, you know, meteorology is interesting because people will joke about weather forecasters don't know what they're doing, right? But that's a science most people sort of accept. You know, they look at their phones and they go, oh yeah, it's going to rain tomorrow. Or, you know, like yesterday was 70 degrees, but I look at my phone and today is going to be 40, right?
I think we don't think about it consciously, but we are using it all the time.
Exactly. So we can do it in some areas and we need to do better in others. So.
And I think
not sure I have a good answer to that question. I'm not sure. It's a tough question.
Yeah, I don't think there is one single right answer to that. But I think you pointed at exactly the right spot, saying it's very tricky not to say someone, hey, you are wrong, without saying it, without like sort of talking them down. Like
Yeah.
you have to explain things in a reasonable way, I guess. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
if I tell my cousin, how could you possibly believe that? That's bananas, right? They're gonna tune out. They're not gonna listen to me.
right.
But if I
You can-
ask, if I say, look, in my experience, I'm working with the scientists and this is what we're seeing. And, you're farmers, you're seeing that there's more rainfall coming as downpours and not, as gradual rainfall. So you're getting rainfall over many fewer days. You're seeing that. That's part of this climate change, right? So
they might not think about the broader picture, but they are seeing local changes in their own specific field.
yes. Yeah.
Right. All right. So anyone else want to go ahead and ask any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for that talk. That was really interesting. So I have a question coming from someone who is not doing environmental research, but I think that the science communication and policy interplay is really interesting. So as someone who's not in that field, but maybe interested as like a general data scientist, how do you see some kind of career path into that field from, a mid-career PhD student? And what might that look like? What kind of position right out of a PhD program would be possible?
So I think there is, one of the things that I think you could bring to the table is you have a great understanding of sort of the limitations of data, right? So when people are like, when people talk in percentages that something will happen, you have a great understanding of that. And you have a solid foundation in science, right? I'm not a climate scientist. I'm certainly not a meteorologist, but I have this background in science that allows all of that stuff to be accessible to me. So you come in with that. You have this sort of ability to understand the scientific method and scientific inquiry. So yeah, I think any of these sort of, there's AAAS fellowship, right? That they're looking for people who can communicate about science. There's a path forward for you there, if that's something you're interested in. So yeah, absolutely. And as some of the other agencies, I'm not as familiar with like NASA and what USGS does and everything. They also have some fellowships along these lines, and AAAS runs fellowships as well. So take a look at those kinds of things. I'm just not as familiar with them as I am at the path at NOAA.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa, for that question. Anyone else want to go ahead? I can ask something which I also thought about in the meanwhile. So Emily, you're saying a lot of decision making regarding budget that happens while judging the pros and cons between different projects. And as you said, there aren't always a right answer to that. So how do you make those kind of judgments? Like this is of utmost use and importance right now, and some other project might have a long-term goals or benefits. So how do you make those kind of decisions?
It's challenging. So one of the frameworks that we've set up within my part of NOAA over the last 3 or 4 years is we've developed a set of priorities. So we've said, we need to work on the next generation of radar. We need to refine climate predictions and projections. One of the goals is that we map 100% of the seafloor in US waters, right? So we have this stated list of priorities that we can sit, when we get proposals, we can look and say, okay, how do these map to these priorities? Does this support one of these priorities? Well, we had a change in administration, right? We went from the Trump administration at the beginning of this year to the Biden administration. So now we have to take another look at those priorities and adjust. The Biden administration has come in and said climate adaptation and resilience is going to be a big priority for this administration, and equity. So then we need to adjust what we're doing, and we say, maybe this thing over here that is, looking at Great Lakes harmful algal blooms might not it's important work, but it might not rise as high as something that Sea Grant is doing, working with native coastal communities to deal with sea level rise and make them more resilient to a changing climate, right? So you kind of have to look at the priorities that are out there. You have to look at, can they execute? Can they do what they say they're going to do, right? Because it can be the best proposal in the world, but if they say if they can't do what they say they're going to do, that's, you know, maybe it's not ready to be funded yet, right? Is it going to be a non-starter with Congress? If I have the best proposal in the world, but I have a congressman who is absolutely never, ever going to support providing funding to this, and they sit on our committee, it's probably not worth spending my political capital to push that project forward without a lot of work ahead of time with that congressman to explain why this is important. The flip side is, if I have something that doesn't really map well to our priorities, but I know that this is a huge priority for this other congresswoman, then maybe that bumps it up a little bit in the priorities. So it's complicated. And everything's trade-offs, right? If I invest a bunch of money in a brand new weather radar system, I may not have as much money to invest in ecosystems research and ocean acidification. And there's no easy answers, and there's no right answer, right? You know, if you look at things one way, you might come up with one answer. If you look at them another way, you might come up with another answer, and they both might be right. And that's where the judgment calls come in.
Right.
It's a good question.
I was wondering, like, how these judgments are made on a day-to-day basis. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, let's thank Emily once again for being with us here today. And I think a lot of us just learned about how this scientific policy related decision makings are done for the first time, because we rarely see speakers from this background. So yeah, thanks again for being with us, and maybe we'll hope to hear from you sometime later again.
Yeah, and I will plan to join the panel discussion later. So.
Yep. So yeah, we're here back from her in the panel discussion in the second session after lunch. So we are gonna meet back again at the same link. This is gonna stay open at 1 to hear from a third speaker. And after that, we're gonna have our panel discussion, which is open for all questions and discussions. So see you everyone again at 1 and start off the second session today. Welcome back everyone joining us for the second session of Combine's 4th Annual Career Symposium. We're gonna start our third talk with Jesse Dunietz. Let me give a brief background regarding Jesse before I hand it off to him, and we can start the presentation. Jesse's career has blended computer science and science communication. After completing his bachelor's degree in computer science at MIT, he went on to complete a PhD in natural language processing at Carnegie Mellon University. Now, for the larger part of the last 3 years, he worked at Elemental Cognition. It's a small AI company where Jesse developed evaluations of automated reading comprehensions, also helped building commercial applications for the company's AI tools, and also contributed to the company's different kinds of external communications. Now, as a different part related to this, starting since graduate school, Jesse also organized and led multiple science communication training programs for STEM students, including student organizations at CMU. And he also helped in organizing science communication conferences and conference events, media training for CMU faculty. He has done extensive science writing, conference events, workshops, both as a summer fellow at Scientific American and also as freelancer. Jesse currently works part-time as an instructional designer at the MIT Communication Lab, which helps engineering students there to build their technical communication skills. He will soon start a new role as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the US State Department. With that, I will hand it over to Jesse, who will take us through, along with him, with his journey from academia to AI and back and forth. So, Jesse.
Thanks, Padan. Yeah, so I will be talking about becoming a science communicator from a background in computer science and artificial intelligence. My goal is not just to talk about myself, but hopefully to give you a flavor of some of the kinds of paths available that involve science communication and the kinds of things you could do that might help you get there if that's something you're interested in. Now, there is no, as people may have discussed this morning, there really is no standard path in science communication. It's not like becoming a lawyer where you kind of know what the professional trajectory looks like. There are many different kinds of science communication, writing and videos and policy, science museums and so forth. Lots of ways of getting into all of those worlds. I'll be talking about my path and the kinds of communication that I've done, but I'll also try to touch on a couple others along the way. As far as the back again part here, as we'll discuss shortly, I ended up going partly back into research and trying to find ways to really combine my computer science and research background with the science communication skills. So it's not purely a one-directional story. There's really three parts of the story. There's the technical part of the story, the communication part of the story, and the attempts at fusion. And so for the most part, I'll be talking about that path. I know that personal histories can get a little boring with every twist and turn, so I'll try to focus on things that might generalize or that might be interestingly different from things you would hear from other people. And then at the end, I'll try to share a few minutes of suggestions for anyone who's interested in getting into this world. To sketch out my career history in a little bit more detail as it relates to computer science and science communication. My background is technical, as Spandan said. Some people do come into science communication more from the humanities side, from the communication side, like from journalism or rhetoric, but probably more than 50% of the people I know in science communication came at it from a scientific or STEM background, and that was true of me as well. So all the things Spandan's ever drew, I went to MIT in computer science, went straight to a PhD in computer science at CMU, and I co-founded this organization, Public Communication for Researchers, that did science communication training and practice opportunities for STEM graduate students. I did get into science writing and freelancing actually as a graduate student. So I freelanced for a bunch of places, including the ones shown here. Of course, my crowning achievement was getting an article into scarymommy.com by accident, long story. I did a AAAS mass media fellowship in 2017. That's actually a science writing fellowship. So it's not communication training, it's actually content production. So I was writing as a staff writer for Scientific American for 10 weeks over that summer. And then I finished up my PhD in 2018 and started working 50% time at the MIT Communication Lab, which again, mainly the main service it provides is peer coaching. We train graduate students in various engineering departments to serve as coaches for their peers in things like papers and posters and CVs, all sorts of technical adjacent communication. The other 50% of my time during that period right after grad school was a combination of freelance writing, mainly for science YouTube channels like the ones here, and also working with this think tank called SAFE, Securing America's Future Energy, writing some articles about self-driving cars. I did go back into somewhat, at least into the research world in 2019 when I was recruited to Elemental Cognition, spent about 2.5 years there, actually only at 80% time. So I was still, I made a point of keeping one day a week to continue working with the communication lab during that period. And now I am once again in transition and soon to be starting at the State Department as a fellow. So let me now dig into some of the perhaps the more interesting moments in that history that might say something, something interesting that offer some useful tidbits. During undergrad, I was very interested in artificial intelligence. I expected that I was going to want to go into academic research, so it was kind of a no-brainer that I figured I would go to grad school. Despite considering myself a pretty hardcore STEM person, though, I did take a lot of communication-heavy humanities courses, things like philosophy and linguistics, and actually some of the thinking and knowledge as well as communication skills that I picked up in those classes turned out to be more useful than some of what I learned in my CS classes. So certainly I found that to be something worth investing in, both formally and informally, even though it might have seemed less central. Now, this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but when I was wrapping up as an undergrad, I was still naive enough in my views about artificial intelligence to think in terms, the same kinds of terms that people were thinking in the 80s, where the goal is to build an imitation of human minds in silicon, and we're going to do this with all sorts of symbolic approaches and thinking really hard about what brains do and then trying to do it. And I really enjoyed thinking about those kinds of big, thorny, almost philosophical style questions. But then trying to start out in grad school and figure out what grad school to go to, I hit a bit of a rough patch because it seemed like AI, that kind of AI, didn't really exist anymore. Everything had really shifted toward machine learning and much more data-driven approaches, and for good reason. So when I got to CMU, I did, ultimately decided that I was still going to go for the PhD in some form of AI, but I experimented for a year. In my first year at CMU, I was working in computational neuroscience. And that did not turn out super well for me. I did not have a great advising relationship. It also was just way too much biology for me. I was not really into the dealing with monkey brains sorts of stuff. So I ultimately switched to natural language processing after that first year. But throughout that process of searching, I wasn't finding a tremendous amount of meaning and excitement in the work that I was doing in computational neuroscience. And I also, in addition to that, knew that I was interested in something beyond just academic research as ways of spending my time, that I wanted to find ways of tying things that I was doing more directly into things with immediate social impact, or something where I could see the impact on somebody else rather than just staying within the walls of academia. And actually, this is a fairly common story, not necessarily the computational neuroscience part, but the idea that people, when they start out in graduate school, they often do discover, or a little ways into graduate school, often discover a passion for science communication because they find that it keeps you excited about things. It reminds you why you're in the field in the first place. It feels like you're doing something beneficial for someone in the short term, not just maybe someday somebody will read this paper and do something else with it that will maybe be useful. And so given all of those inclinations, I started looking for various kinds of more science communication-like opportunities. I initially focused actually on outreach, which I think is something that you all have to do, if I remember correctly, in the combined program. So there, like UMD, we at Carnegie Mellon, we had some established programs for things like bringing in students from local schools for computational thinking activities, going out and doing road shows at schools and showing off the kinds of things one does in computer science. And that's a very common type of science communication for people to do even while they remain as essentially full-time STEM professionals and researchers and engineers and so forth. And there are lots and lots of programs to support people in the STEM world who want to do that kind of activity. Things really shifted for me, though, about a year into my PhD, around the same time that I was switching advisors, actually. I went to a talk at the Carnegie Science Center in Pittsburgh, and the speaker was talking about the relationships between the general American public and people in the world of STEM and science. And he kept arguing that, he kept saying again and again that, people in the scientific world are not doing a good job of making themselves relatable and part of the in-group and trustworthy to people outside the field. And this kind of this is essential for good communication, and communication is essential for society to benefit from science and so forth. And in the Q&A, some graduate student who I wish I knew the name of raised his hand and said, "Oh, that sounds lovely. I would love to learn to do that. Who is going to teach me?" And the answer was more or less, that's not really a thing that there's a lot of support for right now, unfortunately. And that was a moment for me when a light bulb went off, and I was like, it sounds like there's a need here. This is the kind of thing also that I am interested in learning about. Maybe I need to start this program. And so with two other friends, also graduate students, not all in computer science, but both at Carnegie Mellon also, we started putting together a program of workshops and training opportunities, practice opportunities, that we really fleshed out over the next few years, lots of invited speakers as well. And that was huge for me. This, I would say, is where I got a lot of the communication skills that I rely on now. I was not especially well equipped going in terms of communication skills. In fact, one of my major motivations was I wished this program existed so that I could learn from it, but it didn't, so I was going to have to make it. So nonetheless, the process of helping run this program actually gave me a lot of exposure to the things that I wanted to learn. I got to work directly with the presenters, the guest presenters, to develop their content. I got to glean a lot of their expertise. In fact, even more than was shared in the workshop, because we were iterating on it and pruning it down with them. It got me connected with this science communication community, made me aware of the space of opportunities there. It also gave me a reason to make myself known to leaders in the field, to go to conferences and talk about science communication. It was a big boost in professional skills in terms of organizing and professional communication with invited guests and so forth. Did a bunch of design and writing just for materials for the program. And it made me realize that I could actually start and lead something, which was not something that I had ever really done before. It also inadvertently kicked off my freelance career. That actually started with the Science Nonfiction blog, which was the group blog that we ran as part of public communication for researchers. Every week we would get together and workshop like somebody would write a blog post, a draft, we would get together and discuss it. They would go make some edits and eventually would go up on the group blog website. And that's, by the way, a great paradigm that I strongly recommend if you're interested in getting into writing. And I'm not sure if there's one in your area, but there are certainly many groups that support each other in this kind of science writing, if that's something you're interested in getting into. So that was what got me started with the notion that it's not just something that has to remain abstract. I can actually write things and they can end up on the internet. Then what really kicked things off for me was that all the work that I'd done for this training program got me into ComSciCon, which is a national science communication conference by and for graduate students. There's a national version. There are also smaller regional versions of it. And a big part of this conference was writing a piece of science communication, getting it critiqued by peers and experts, and then they offered the opportunity to get it published in some cases. And so I actually got a piece into Scientific American guest blogs, and it was shockingly straightforward. The bar was just not as high as I thought it was. And so after that, every time I would workshop a piece with the group blog, rather than immediately posting it on the group blog, I would first actually pitch it around and see whether any professional outlets were interested in it, which was nice and flattering and made a little extra money, and also led directly to getting that fellowship at AAAS, at spending a full summer at Scientific American. And so I think my key takeaway from all of those experiences was, wow, I really thought I had to be like Neil deGrasse Tyson or something. You don't. You actually, there's room for lots of voices, and you don't have to be the most mind-blowing communicator ever to be a valuable voice in the conversation and for people to want to publish you even. Given that I had a background in computer science in my freelancing as well, and particularly at Scientific American, I carved out kind of a niche for myself writing about hard computer science. And I actually think all of you are probably in a great position in this respect, because what I found was that probably the majority of people coming into science communication from the science side are coming from places like biology, ecology, maybe chemistry, but it's like a few people in physics, but there's really not that much in terms of people who are well-versed in math and computer science. The people who are well-versed in math and computer science tend to either go into research or go into industry. And what that meant was that having the ability to sit down and parse through a paper on optical computing was extremely valuable for people at Scientific American, because they could hand me that assignment and I would actually be able to just write that thing. And there weren't that many people comparatively who were able to do that. So I definitely think that's a great place to be if you're interested in developing those communication skills. That combination can be extremely powerful. So despite all of this time in grad school, on science communication stuff. I did eventually finish my thesis at the beginning of 2018. I was struggling to figure out what to do next. There were kind of three possibilities. Research was fine. I enjoyed that kind of intense thinking. I didn't really think I was the best at it. It wasn't my comparative advantage in economics terms. I also sometimes found it stressful, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. It often feels like it's some kind of an evaluation of your personal ability to think creatively or something. And I also didn't provide as much of that satisfaction of immediate connection with society that I was looking for. I enjoyed the writing. I found it satisfying, but I had found at Scientific American that for me, and this is not at all a universal experience, but for me, full-time science writing was very tiring. There are kind of three things you do as a science writer. You're either coming up with brilliant ideas for new stories, which is hard cognitive work. You're interviewing somebody for a story, which is several tasks simultaneously, listening and taking notes and thinking of your next questions. Then, sometimes you're actually writing, which is again, hard cognitive work. So I just found that doing that all day, every day left me very drained. And I also wasn't thrilled with the fact that a lot of science writing is focused on science news, and I was much more interested in talking about concepts than the latest study. I also thought about continuing in science communication training. I spent a lot of effort in my last 2 or 3 years of grad school trying to make connections with professional organizations who might be interested in having me do that, but I was having a hard time finding opportunities. I did ultimately get very lucky, triply lucky, I would say. First, there was a mutual connection who put me in touch directly with the director of this MIT Communication Lab program. And it turned out that they decided they could use some help designing training materials. They could afford to pay for it. And so I joined the communication lab as an instructional designer, working mainly on the training materials for the coaches 50% time. Now, this was a somewhat natural extension of my previous communication training work with public communication for researchers. It's a little bit different in the sense that it's focusing on academic and technical communication within fields. I would say that there's a lot more similarity there than people sometimes recognize. And it was a very natural transition for me. Actually, several of the people who now work at the communication lab came at it from a more public-facing communication angle. So definitely there's a lot of, not quite the same thing, quite the same kind of communication, but there was a lot of overlap between them. The second piece of luck was that I saw an ad for a regular freelance gig with SciShow, one of the big science YouTube channels. And so I applied, and they did ask me to start writing some scripts for them. So a lot of my remaining time during that post-grad school period was spent on freelance work later, mostly for SciShow, also for some outlets like It's Okay to Be Smart and a few others. And again, I could write about these like computer science-y and techie topics like how computers filter out porn, how 2D semiconductors could change computer hardware, things that drew significant numbers of views, but were maybe not as easy for others on staff to write. And then I also had a friend who worked at this think tank on self-drive that was interested in self-driving cars, and they'd been talking about how they wished there was more high-quality, well-informed writing out there on the topic. And he suggested to them that they might want to sponsor me for 6 months or so to just do some digging and write some articles for external outlets and for their own blog on self-driving cars and some of the technicalities there. So I was able to cobble together these pieces into a fairly satisfying set of science communication activities for a good year and a half or so. And I think the fact that I was able to do that was largely about luck. It wasn't just about luck. It was also the fact that I was open to exploring some of these kind of untraditional arrangements and opportunities, and the fact that I had made a point of reaching out tentacles into all of these places where I was talking to lots of different people and trying to get myself on mailing lists and different information streams that might make me aware of opportunities that were popping up that I otherwise might not have gotten access to. So that was the turn toward science communication and really dedicating a lot of time to that. I was a little bit sad that I had kind of abandoned my hard-won AI expertise. Yeah, I was still doing some writing that was related to it, but it wasn't quite the same. And so I got to pick that up again when I started working at Elemental Cognition. I was recruited to EC in part because of my communication skills. That was actually a hard decision for me. I wasn't sure I wanted to go back into research, but it was a really interesting opportunity. The team is really great. They had a lot of people from the original Watson project at IBM, actually. They also, I don't know, I'm not a big product person. I'm more interested in thinking about ideas than products, so I wasn't sure about that. But ultimately, I decided it was worth it for a couple of reasons. One was that they're doing basic NLP and AI research that felt like a bit of a moonshot, but it would be really cool if it would work out. Second, it turned out I didn't actually have to give up on the science communication aspect. First of all, they were very open and in fact excited about the prospect of me doing a fair amount of communications work for the company. And I also negotiated very hard with them to keep that one day reserved for continuing to work at the MIT Communication Lab. And they were open to that. And so I was able to keep that foot in the science communication world. Didn't feel like I was totally leaving that. And then I also figured worst case, I make a tech salary for a little while, then pursue something else. It turns out I don't like it. And so as I was working at EC, I did end up doing both some technical research, coding, that sort of stuff, and a lot of communications work. I helped manage the company's blog. I helped manage the Twitter account. I wrote and edited a bunch of academic papers. And so I kind of had a fun time for a couple of years there. And it did feel like I got to do some amount of fusing the two sets of skills with an additional bonus of the getting to continue in the pure communication work with the Comm Lab. I ultimately decided that it still felt like the skill sets were being parallelized too much, particularly because the company ended up turning more in a product-oriented direction and really wanted more development work, and that wasn't quite as interesting to me anymore. So that's what led me ultimately to apply to the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, which places STEM PhD students with government organizations, government agencies, some of them in Congress as well, for a year or two. And there, my hope is that I'll be able to really take that expertise that I developed in AI. So the office that I'll be working with is a human rights office. They're interested in emerging technologies, particularly AI, and how they're going to affect human rights. And so I'm hoping that will be an opportunity where I will be essentially merging the two in a much more direct way, where I'll be using that expertise in AI, but also communicating about it and working on projects related to it with people who are not nearly as well versed in the technology. And so that's where I am now, sitting here waiting for a security clearance to come through for that. So that's, I think, enough about me. That's probably more than enough about me. Let me just end with a few suggestions for people who are interested in breaking into the science communication world or exploring those paths. First of all, I want to emphasize there are lots and lots of paths in science communication. I talked a lot about writing. A lot of the writing that I did was for written publications, but again, there's also things like scripts for videos, or actually video production, audio production, all sorts of content production that you can be involved in. A lot of people take science communication skills into the science policy world. The Science and Technology Policy Fellowship is a great avenue for doing that. There are also some local organizations and many universities and cities that will help people get into policy work. Of course, there's the world of informal science education, things like museums, science festivals, and finally, don't underestimate the role that science communication skills play in traditional academic roles, and business roles or industry roles. And even if it's not a traditional role, even if it's finding that role that allows you to do a little bit more of the communication stuff in the context of academia or industry, like I was doing at EC, there's a lot of need for this merger of scientific or data and technical skills plus the communication skills, both in academia and in industry. Couple of practical tips. Number one, I would say being an organizer, as I said before, helped me a lot. This is an article about our experience organizing this training program at CMU, and it really gave me all the opportunities I mentioned earlier. I strongly recommend that if you see a need and you think that it would be valuable for other people and or for you for this need to be met, being the person who creates the thing that meets the need is often very valuable for you as well. Second, there is a broad world of science communication experts who are very friendly, very generous, very eager to help people. And so these are some examples of organizations that will do formal trainings, provide resources online, run events that you can attend, take advantage of any and all of those that you can find. Third, there's a broader community of people invested in science communication work. I won't go into all of these in detail, but happy to talk about them in the Q&A if people are interested. But basically, again, there are lots of people who are deeply invested in the idea of getting people up to speed in the science communication world, sharing skills, sharing knowledge, and so there's a lot of support out there. Number 4, in addition to the organizations specifically dedicated to science communication, there are a lot of field-specific organizations and professional organizations that have really done a lot of work in the science communication world and are looking to help their members communicate better and find opportunities to do so. These are some examples of professional organizations that happen to have particularly strong science communication support programs for their members, but there are others as well. And finally, even thinking beyond science and scientific communication, it really helps to get exposure to a lot of different kinds of communication. That can be storytelling. The Moth is a wonderful storytelling show. Story Collider is kind of a show in the spirit of the Moth, specifically about scientific topics. Write for your campus newspaper. Do some improv classes. Do a 3-minute thesis competition where you get experience speaking in front of an audience for 3 minutes in a TED-style way. Write for a group blog. Write your own blog. There's all sorts of ways that you can help a friend edit a podcast, even if it has nothing to do with science. Any kind of communication experience can really help build your skill set and help you understand what appeals to you. And of course, if there is any way that I can help in any of that, I am certainly happy to do so. Please do feel free to contact me, and I'm happy, obviously, to discuss some more in the Q&A as well.
Thanks a lot, Jesse. I think all of us would agree that was a plethora of information all out there, and you touched a wide range of topics. And let's give a round of applause virtually, Jesse, for that. I'm sure all of you guys would have a lot of questions and maybe to touch on different parts of the talk that he just gave. I would start off with a couple of quick questions, and then I would leave it to the rest of the guys. So Jesse, I was wondering if I have to think between the difference of say traditional academic articles, research articles, and science communication articles. In the traditional sense, when research articles come out, there's a system of checks and balances out there, right? So it goes through a peer review process, and it takes at least quite a few years for a new idea to be accepted in the community, even it sometimes takes decades, and for that to be accepted as a scientific principle. What are the relevant checks and balances out there in scientific communication, so that even if a person says some kind of, I don't want to say a wrong idea, say a different idea, and you put it out there, what are the different balances and checks that are there in the community? Because I would assume this kind of articles would have a far broader reach to the general public rather than a research article.
Yeah, I mean, the counterpoint to them having a far broader reach is they also have a much shorter lifespan. But the point is well taken, that certainly there's much less of a, there's not a peer review process, right, for news articles going out. There's not this kind of extended back and forth between critics and the authors usually. I would say there are a couple of layers of protection. First of all, I want to emphasize that as much as journalists do sometimes get things wrong, I have yet to meet a journalist in science communication who was not highly motivated to get things right. And actually, I think that's one of the really valuable things about people who are, not just pulled off the police beat for a day to do a science story, but who are actually immersed in the science world and are able to write consistently about science, is that they have a lot of familiarity with the scientific process that allows them to do a good job of getting the story right in the first place. The second layer of defense is your editor. Unless you're simply writing a blog on the internet, your own blog, which is fine, plenty of people do that. But if you're writing for a professional publication, you almost always will go through an editor. And the editor might flag things that sound a little off, or say, you can't just say this, you have to quote somebody as saying this. And then if you don't have that quote, you can't say it, that sort of stuff. Depending on the publication and the publication format, there may be yet another level, which is fact checking. I was shocked to find out how thorough the fact checking process is. This is not, by the way, the case for like regular newspaper articles usually, but for like a monthly periodical, like a magazine. So when I would write for the Scientific American website, I did not normally get fact checked, meaning nobody was going through line by line. And for the, and then the downside is occasionally mistakes got through and we would have to issue a correction, right? Which is fine. That just means you put a little, asterisk on the, so this is another layer of protection. You can just change it later. If you find out you were wrong, somebody will contact you, put a little asterisk and say, this used to say something else, it was wrong. You can't do that in a print magazine. And you certainly can't do it, it's harder to do that a month after the fact. So for the print magazine, when I wrote one article for the print magazine, they went like phrase by phrase. They made me annotate every single assertion that I made in the article and say exactly how I knew that was true. And in fact, that they started when I was freelancing for SciShow, they picked up that practice as well. They weren't always doing it far further back in their history, but they started hiring fact checkers and going line by line and insisting any number, any assertion, any fact we have to be able to trace to something that is authoritative. So there is actually some pretty good infrastructure in place to catch mistakes.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point that you raised, that even if it has a much broader reach, it's very short-lived, and you can go back always and rectify if there were any mistakes. So on that note, I would leave it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions, thoughts, comments, please go ahead.
So I have a question. I'll turn on my video as well. So Jesse, you talked a little bit about how it's sort of like someone coming from data science or computer science is filling a maybe underserved niche within the community of science communication, as there maybe are more biologists and people in physics even. But I was wondering also, coming from that background, have you felt, or have you sort of found yourself that the technical skills that you built, not just the knowledge, have helped you in the field at all? Like I know there's, for example, data journalism and things like that, but beyond that, like I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, if in your experience there's been other things.
It's an interesting question. I would say that there's very little coding involved in science writing. I have occasionally found, actually at the communication lab, some of those skills have come in very useful. I can make one heck of an Excel spreadsheet. So that has really been valuable sometimes for data analysis that we needed to do internally. Not so much about the communication skills part, but just like figuring out what kind of impact we were having. Let's see. Yeah, I think really where it's come in is mostly that I know what people are talking about when they say things. So if I'm reporting on some extremely arcane security vulnerability, like some of the craziest security vulnerabilities that ever happened, which was a video that I made for SciShow. you know, I could actually put all the pieces together and be like, ah, that's how the hack worked, which I think would be really hard if I didn't understand what Stack Overflows actually were, right? Like there are things that you just have to know to get the gist of the technical idea. But there are, you know, I think data journalism is probably the place where that cashes out the most. Like there are people who really do spend all their time sifting through data and looking for the patterns and then writing about those patterns. I have a good friend actually from the fellowship who went on to do that for a couple of organizations and outlets.
Awesome, thanks.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Hi, I have a question. So you mentioned these more rigorous publications where you're getting fact-checked phrase by phrase. I'm curious if you, with your science background and communication background, have stumbled on any tools or found any tools or have any advice for sort of just managing your facts and your information, and then going from that to you know, writing something and making sure your information is correct and in line.
Yeah, I wish I had a really good answer for you. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer. I think that's you know, to some extent like gathering notes and figuring out how everything fits together and keeping the traceability of all your information is very much a personal process that I don't know of anyone who has a really good standardized way of doing. For me, what I usually do is I do almost everything in Google Docs and or Microsoft Word. I basically like gather collections of, I gather a bunch of bullets that are like things that I might want to include. And I always make sure to hyperlink them to where they came from. And that's how I try to trace, I keep track of where they were, because otherwise I do forget completely. I guess there are also, I mean, that's for things that I've found publicly. Then if I've done interviews, it's a little trickier because, you know, you need to be like, this is a thing that I found, you know, that was at 2 minutes and 37 seconds into that interview. So I might just add comments for that. Or I often have little like important timestamps in the interview marked in my handwritten notes from the interview. So I'll also be able to trace back through that. But it is a little bit of a haphazard process, I admit.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks, Gareth, for the question. And I think we can start on the brief panel discussion right now. As I mentioned earlier in the session one, Sam couldn't join us because he had to travel with the team for a playoff game they're having right now. So, yep. I'm going to start off with just a beginner question, and you guys, you could take it off from there. What are there any specific skills that, for both of you, which you had learned during your experience in academia, which you're using right now? And if, for example, say I'm in the traditional academic position, for say a faculty position, so I'm not interested in either scientific communication or policy-wise decision making in my career, but I'm still somehow interested or willing to integrate them in my day-to-day work. What could I do? How could I do that better? So, Emily, do you wanna go for it?
I have to take myself off mute. You know, I think just thinking about the question, and, you know, if you're not interested in science policy or communication, I think one of the things that we don't always do very well in academia is actually emphasize just the communication itself. Like even as an academic, I think being able to explain what you do in plain language is a really, really critical thing. And it broadens the value of your work, right? So if you have work that is potentially useful to people, which, you know, I imagine everybody hopes it is, you know, being able to describe that in plain language and building those communication skills will help you as an academic as well. So the plain language communication, I know I've emphasized that a lot in my talk, I think is just really, really critical. And it's something that I don't think academia always places a lot of emphasis on. And, you know, if you look at the science that gets a lot of attention, sometimes it's just because the person who's driving it can describe it plainly. It may not always be the most prominent science or the most groundbreaking, but it has a champion who can describe it plainly so that people understand it.
Right. And maybe at the same time, a somewhat higher amount of value is sometimes given on how technical the work is. And we sort of, I mean, I'm even part of that, take pride in that fact that it's not meant for the normal folks, specifically targeted for a certain kind of audience. And yeah, so Jesse, could you point out at certain skills for anyone who are transitioning into industry, but those skills are still important there, which they learned from their academic experience?
Well, yes, but let me first actually jump on something Emily said for just a second.
Sure, yeah.
I definitely like being able to talk about your research and communicate it effectively is like one of the most important things to have in an academic career. And if you haven't already read The Science of Scientific Writing by Gopin and Swan, do it today. It's a fantastic article that basically demonstrates that academic writing does not have to be hard to read, even if it's very technical. Let's see, as far as skills, so sorry, which direction did you want to go? You wanted to go from skills learned in the academic setting that apply in the industry setting?
Right, yeah. Because when we are learning them, we don't have say industry at the back of my head. I'm thinking
Right.
it would be helpful in this setting, but maybe those are helpful in other scenarios as well.
Yeah. So I think probably for me the biggest takeaway, like from particularly from grad school, from academic experience in grad school, was that I felt like I didn't have to be afraid of looking at some completely unfamiliar set of questions and ideas, and like jumping into them and like coming away with some conclusions and recommendations after a few days of digging. Not that I would expect that I would become an expert, but that I could, if somebody would say like, I think we might need to adopt this approach. We don't have anybody who knows anything about this approach. Can you go learn something about it and figure out whether we should adopt this approach? I think the same kinds of skills that you use in grad school when you're thinking about possible ways of executing your thesis project or whatever, I think those are the same skills you apply in that industry situation as well.
And I would add to that, from a government standpoint, is knowing the questions to ask, right? Being able to look at something, maybe it's not in your subject area, but you have enough knowledge of sort of, the broader area to say, well, I have questions about this, and are you going to be able to execute that project? Because I have questions about whether you're going to be able to meet this scientific achievement. Just having that sort of background and intellectual curiosity to ask the questions, to kind of figure out what recommendations to make or what decisions should be made.
And to be aware of the kinds of issues that often pop up, like, maybe you shouldn't trust that evidence because that's the kind of thing that often doesn't have good statistical power or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Right. I think that exactly, helps me pointing to my next question, which would be much more specific for this kind of transitions. Say I'm a current graduate student and I want to make transitions from traditional academic positions to science communication policies. But the fellowships that both of you mentioned in your talks, they are pretty far and few in between. And the positions, there aren't too many positions. So what are the things, major changes I need to do right now, sort of?
Fellowships are a nice gateway. But I think the message I was trying to get across earlier about being an organizer is also, maybe to extend that a little, you don't have to wait for somebody to give you permission to do something.
Right.
You can just start writing things. You can just start, like sending your ideas to, maybe you should, whatever. We can talk a little bit more about what it would look like to send your ideas to places in a way that might be beneficial to you and them. But, there are things that you can do to like get your ideas out there, to get yourself started, to get a foot in the door that don't involve somebody else rubber stamping you first. There's a guy who I mentioned or briefly mentioned the SciCommers Slack as one of the resources as the community resources that's available. There's a guy who's very active on there who has applied, I think, 2 or 3 times now to the Mass Media Fellowship. He hasn't gotten the Mass Media Fellowship, but he runs a science publishing website called The Xylem, and he has all these great interviews with scientists, and he's doing great stuff. And I think he will ultimately not have a problem if he wants to continue into that space, even though he never got the fellowship.
I think from my standpoint, from government and from some of the folks who have worked for me who have gone on to work in the NGO nonprofit world, is thinking broadly, right? And, you know, I often say this, particularly to younger employees, is like, just because your experience doesn't perfectly fit the qualifications in a job, apply anyway, right? You know, you have you're in a data science program, somebody's asking for someone who can do quantitative analysis in an environmental science field. You can probably do that, right? And so look broadly at not-for-profits. Look broadly at we live in a town with a whole bunch of government contract companies. And while my part of NOAA gets a handful of people through the fellowship every year, we get a whole lot more through contracting companies. So, you know, the SAICs and the GDITs and, you know, the alphabet soup of government contractors, you know, just kind of start browsing through, because while a lot of it will be defense contracting, and maybe that's not what you're interested in, maybe it is, that's okay, that pays well. You'll find the odd thing in there that is maybe a little more, you know, maybe it's at NASA and it's, you know, something that's a little more aligned to your interests, or maybe it's at, you know, a statistical analysis position in, you know, another agency. Like there's a bunch of different kind of things that I don't think when I was in grad school I was really aware was out there. And you happen to live in a place where there's a lot of that here, right? If you were at you know, maybe a more traditional, a different state school that's, you know, in the Midwest, there wouldn't be those opportunities locally. So.
That's all a really good point. And I think one thing that I was definitely not aware of for at least my first couple of years of grad school that can really help with this kind of process is informational interviewing. If you find somebody in the, you know, world that looks interesting, you're just like, I don't know I didn't know your job existed 5 minutes ago. That's really cool. Send them an email and ask to chat for 30 minutes. And people are often very willing to just chat about what their job is like and help you understand that world. And, you know, not that you should go in with this expectation, but sometimes you can get jobs out of that kind of experience, that interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I chat with a lot of our fellows and some of our young, you know, undergrad interns and that sort of thing. And usually I can make time on my calendar for that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people are willing to do that. It's the whole idea of like lifting as we climb, right? So.
I had received quite a few kind of thoughts or comments from my peers regarding this while we were trying to find the theme of the workshop, which is, say somebody is not fully convinced whether they should go to industry right now and ends up joining a postdoc position. Does that make it the person overqualified, or it's still possible to make this kind of transitions? What do you guys think?
If you were coming into a government science position, I think you would almost be expected to do the postdoc, and that would be more of a government research position. I think it's all in how you sell yourself and how you couch your resume. I can't speak very well to the private sector, right? But in the government, we're looking more at minimum qualifications, if that makes sense, versus worrying too much about overqualification. It's sort of meeting that kind of minimum bar that'll get you through the computer screening. And every government job gets tons and tons of applications. So like, I will say if people are interested in a federal position, state positions are different. The resume is very, very different than what you've been told for the private sector. It's very long. You have to write things very specifically so it aligns for the job announcement. So you almost have a different resume for every single job announcement. It is tedious. But you know, I don't think that, you know, if somebody sees a postdoc, like they keep their options open for academia and they want to go do it, I don't think that's going to preclude you from government work. I just can't speak to the private sector in the same way, or the not-for-profit sector, because I don't have a lot of experience there.
I haven't really been very involved in hiring in the private sector. So you should take anything I say with a grain of salt here. But I haven't seen any concern about that in the couple of hiring processes I've been involved with. Certainly the main question was, do we think that we can put this person to good use? And if we think that, like, even, in fact, there was even an instance in my company where, there was a concern of like, well, this person is coming for some kind of a business related role, and we're not really sure that we have a full-time amount of work for a business focused person at the moment. But also we really need the things we do need. And so who cares? Whatever, we'll hire them. And it's much more worth it for us to have them on staff and doing, even if it's only 35 hours a week that we have for them to do, like that's important enough for us that we're having. So I think that's kind of more the attitude, with respect to skills as well, that like, okay, we can't use their PhD in linguistics that well right now, but like, we still need somebody to manage annotators. So great, we'll take them.
That's pretty assuring to know. Like, even if you do that once, you thought you had committed to academia, but change your mind later. Are there any questions from the audience? I just realized I'm asking all the questions.
Let me add one thing to that. I think if you think you're interested in academia, it is much easier to stay on that path than it is to go off on another path and try to get back into academia. And I talk a lot about this with our fellows coming in, that at the end of your fellowship, you have a choice to make, and it is a fork in the road, right? If you stay for a few years working contract work and maybe getting a federal position for a while, it's going to be very, very hard to go back to academia. If you keep going down that postdoc road and you get, you maybe do 1 or 2 postdocs and you're like, you know what, it's been real, I'm done with academia. It's I think it's much easier to make the jump the other direction. But once you get off that academic track, you're pretty off that academic track. So
that's true. I think that's very true with respect to things like government roles. One interesting thing about industry is that, at least in data science and computer science, sometimes, depending on the nature of the job, you can still keep enough of a foot in the research world that you can go back into academia. So I've seen people go do research at Google Research, and because that's almost an academic unit within the company, where you're doing you're publishing the papers and you're essentially still functioning as a researcher just outside academia, in that kind of position, it can be easier to then move back into that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Teresa, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. It's not so much a career question, it's more of a morale question. So, but I think it's something that both of you can speak to, because science communication is clearly very important, especially these days. And so Jesse, you talked about early on in your career where you found science communication to be very exciting and more rewarding with more of an immediate impact. But I can imagine these days, both in science communication and policy, that it would be really frustrating, especially because there is such an anti-science movement. So I guess my question is, how do you still find rewarding, outcomes, and how do you not let the anti-science or just like not accurate information out there get overwhelming? And do you have any advice on that?
That's tough. I don't know if you've noticed, my agency hasn't released a lot of good news on climate. So it's a challenge. I will say it's interesting in a congressional standpoint. It's been interesting over my career to see, you'll see members of Congress in the media saying the most anti-science things and like climate change isn't real and everything. And then they'll pull you aside and they'll be like, so my constituents are really dealing with really severe drought and it's gotten worse over the last 20 years. So how do we get money to use so that we can make things better for my constituents? Yeah, I know it's climate change. I can't say that in the, so I kind of view any victory as a victory, right? And you take your wins where you can get them. I mean, I'm not going to get political, but it was a very different environment from 2016 to 2020. And, you know, we had to navigate that. And that's kind of how I approach it. It can be hard with the, you know, you're looking at, you have interactions with people. I was wearing a NOAA jersey some years ago in a national park. I'm a cyclist, and I got yelled at by somebody because he was anti-climate change. And I was like, you know, where are we that we're walking up to strangers and yelling at them? And, you know, he wasn't in a place where he wanted to engage, but sometimes people engage, and it's surprising. And you can have these interactions I talked about earlier, where if you can bring it to them on an individual level in a way that they can kind of reference. But yeah, some days are hard, and some days you win major victories, and it's kind of like that with any job.
On the note of that personal engagement, I think something that helps a lot is empathizing to the extent that you can with where the person is coming from, particularly because there have been some really interesting studies on people's beliefs about science. And interestingly, the vast majority of people still, well, the majority of people, and the same majority of people as for the past several decades, more or less, still essentially trust the scientific establishment in just about the same way. And nobody really considers themselves anti-science. I believe it was Dan Kahan at Yale who did some very interesting work on how people's beliefs about controversial scientific questions correlated with both their political views and the actual science. And everybody always thinks that they're in line with the science, and they're right a third of the time. And that's true across the political spectrum. It just depends which issues that you think you're right on that you're actually wrong about. So I think keeping that in mind helps a lot as like, well, this person actually believes that they're saying the truth, and like I'm going to engage with them as on the assumption that they're coming at this from what they think is a well-motivated standpoint, even if I know they're wrong. I also have taken some inspiration from this concept that comes out of the museum world called the zone of proximal development, where when you're communicating, like in a museum exhibit, you're never going to get somebody to understand all the ins and outs of like astrophysics. You can't do that in 5 minutes, but you're trying to get them one step closer toward a little bit more understanding, whatever the next sliver that they can get to from their current position is. And if you do that, you've won. That's a win. So I guess that's also been helpful for me to think.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
I think, as Emily said, small victories. You need to cherish them. Any other questions? If not, I would say let's end we have reached the end of the symposium today, and I would try to finish on a lighter note. I would ask both of you, do you miss the academic settings? Yes, no? And if yes, which part? Or if no, then which part you don't miss at all?
Oh boy, I don't think I do. I think I ended up in a place where I'm really well suited to. I sort of I'm in a very fast-paced environment. I have new issues that I deal with every day, and I really like that no day is the same as the previous. And that's just not, that's just not academia, right? And I really respect the people who do the long-term research. I respect the work that they do, whether it's in an academic setting or a government research setting or private research setting. But I think it's different personalities are suited to different things, and my personality is definitely suited to the we've got 16 questions coming in from Congress, 2 of them are due in an hour, and 6 of them are due tomorrow, and I've got a property issue at a lab in Oklahoma, and I've got an acquisition that I've got to deal with, and I just like that sort of constant onslaught of stuff. And for some people, they would be like, that's way too much. Just leave me alone. leave me to my lab, and I want to research this particular area and this one thing, which is great. But yeah, I don't think I miss academia at all.
I generally do not miss academia either. I think the one thing that like I might miss or could have missed about academia is the fact that you're so often surrounded by really smart, interesting people who all know all these wonderful things you don't. And so like being able to rub shoulders with that environment, I think was often nice for me. But I've been very fortunate that I've been able to find jobs where I can continue doing that. So I think I didn't end up missing that, although I have heard from others who left academia that they sometimes do miss that level of stimulation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned in my talk earlier that I'm very fortunate because I get to do that as the research arm of NOAA. I get to interact with all of those amazing, brilliant people and learn about the amazing work that they're doing. So I get a little bit of the best of both worlds there.
I was kind of hoping one of you would at least say, I miss the free pizzas or the cookies in the seminars, but I guess that's just me.
Yeah, up until the
Okay.
pandemic, I was getting free lunch at work. So,
That's true.
can't
That's
compete.
true. Not
Yeah,
in
we don't
all
get that
online
in
seminars.
government.
You don't have them?
No, absolutely not. You cannot spend appropriated, basically, government money on food and drink. So we don't have any of that.
Silver lining.
I will say that, so like the one thing that is nice about academia is the level of flexibility. I think working a quote unquote real job meant that I couldn't, like, my wife and I couldn't just be like, hey, it's a Wednesday afternoon, let's go camping for 2 days, right? Like that was no longer an option.
Right.
So we actually had to be like normal people and like go to the water park on the day when everybody else is going to the water park. I think we'll live, right?
Can't just take days off, I guess. All right, on that note, let's just thank our speakers once again for joining with us here today and share their insights and unique stories, experiences with us. Thanks to all of you who stayed back till the very end of the session, and hope we guys, all of us could take something back home with us, which we learned today. Thanks a lot again.